The binding of Isaac is one of the most theologically challenging passages in the entire Torah. On a basic reading, God appears to need assurance of Abraham's loyalty and love, and so he puts him through an agonizing test to see if Abraham would sacrifice his beloved son, if God so wished. That Abraham is stopped at the last minute is almost beside the point. The point is that Abraham successfully demonstrated that he was willing to go all the way. The story has since been held up as a model of unwavering devotion and faith. Whatever Abraham felt for his son was secondary to the overwhelming love he felt for God. Knowing what his God required of him was enough to override his natural paternal instincts. In this reading, faith is synonymous with certainty. Abraham harbors no doubt as to what is required of him by God. If there's any internal struggle, it's between his mind and his heart. His mind knows what he must do, although his heart pulls in the opposite direction. Ultimately, his sense of certitude is what empowers him to take a knife to his child's exposed throat. While many Bible scholars and theologians, Jewish and non-Jewish, wrestle with the implications this story has for God, what sort of God would even imagine putting a father through such an agonizing trauma? Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Lehner, known as the Ishbitzer Rebbe, is more interested in what was going on in Abraham's mind. He takes his cue from the opening passage of the text. Vayehi achar hadvarim ha'eleh, ve'ha'elohim nisa es Avraham. And it came to pass after these things that Elohim tested Abraham. The Ishbitzer notes that the name of the deity testing Abraham is Elohim, not Adonai. In Jewish mysticism, the written form for Adonai, Yud, He, Vav, He, represents a clear and direct flow of divine energy, an unmasked revelation, if you will. The name Elohim represents a screen that obscures the clarity of divine energy or light. That the name Elohim is used in connection with Abraham's test is telling. It implies that Abraham did not have a clear sense of what it was God was asking him to do. In the biblical text, God never explicitly tells Abraham to slaughter his son. He asks Abraham to bring up his son as an offering. This agonizing ambiguity, says the Ishbitzer, is what Abraham's test is all about. God might be unreasonably demanding. He might even be asking, in Kierkegaard's terminology, for a suspension of the ethical. Tough as such a challenge may be, it can be achieved if tempered by a sense of clarity and certainty that one is doing God's will. But Abraham was not even afforded such a sense of clarity. His terrifying ordeal was couched in ambiguity. The Ishbitzer perceptively notes that the test belongs to Abraham alone. Although it is Isaac whose life hangs in the balance, the story is really not about him at all, but about his father. This is because Isaac had no doubts about the divine will. He assumed that whatever his father was about to do was at God's behest. Terrified as he must have been, he could at least take comfort in certitude. But such comfort was not available to Abraham. And if he wasn't certain about what God wanted him to do, there was the very real possibility that he might violate God's will by murdering his son. This dilemma itself captures the very nature of faith. Nothing is further from faith than the overconfident believer who swaggers with certainty through life, doubtless of God and God's expectations. One who is able to justify as the will of God his behavior and choices regardless of their consequences. This is not faith. Faith is not an exclamation mark. It's a question mark. It's a posture of extreme humility. A person of faith knows that he stands at the precipice. His choices in life could not be more significant. He does his best to live in sync with God's will, but he's never absolutely certain what that will is. One misstep, and a sacred offering can become cold-blooded murder. And yet, he gropes through the mist, and with a sense of trepidation and awe, he seeks a relationship with his ever-elusive Creator.